Thank you so much for your time, Michelle and Olivia. So can you just tell me, what stage you're at in your studies or career? Michelle first, just to help
But
you.
I'll go first. Yeah. So I am, my role is a creative project director. I'm also co-owner of my own business, Firefly Creations Limited. And what we do is we deliver immersive attractions for theme parks and other sort of attractions. So that means we work with a number of different engineers to bring really experiences to life that people are going to want to come and enjoy and come together with an experience with friends and family.
Right, and what about you, Olivia?
So I graduated 2.5 years ago from chemical engineering. My first job was at Lush, which is what was highlighted in the This Is Engineering campaign. So I worked as, I sourced aroma chemicals in an ethical and environmental way. I just
Lush, as in soaps and the.
Lush, yeah, cosmetics, fresh handmade.
I
Yeah.
think sometimes when you describe careers like this, you assume you're in some kind of lab somewhere or you're in some kind of very clinical environment, but it just goes to show that you can do some great stuff with obviously chemical engineering and Lush.
Yes, yeah, it was a little bit of a different career path, I think, from what is expected, but it was good. And then I recently just started a new role just before, I think the week before lockdown started. So I haven't really done masses in my new job yet, but I am a junior consultant for Resource Future. So I'm now looking at still in environmental and sustainability, but I'm looking at essentially data analysis and recycling, data analysis and numbers to help with recycling, increase recycling, circular economy, and other behavior change around waste as well. So that's my new role.
So at what stage in your studies, in your school and college career and maybe university career, did you think, no, actually I'm going to go down more of a STEM engineering sort of route?
I think I was always quite interested in maths and science. I think that's always been on my radar. I was quite an all-rounder, but kind of maths and engineering made sense as a career path. I didn't even really know engineering existed though as a concept until very late in my studies. I didn't have anyone in my family who's an engineer, which I think is quite a common way to get into it. So then chemical engineering just happened to fit my A-level subjects. It was as much luck as that when I was looking at a university brochure. So it was quite late on that I picked it. And I think for me it was environmental, working with the environment and helping aid sustainability was what I wanted to do. And I felt engineering fitted that as opposed to anything else.
And what about you, Michelle? What stage were you at when you thought you were going down that route rather than another route?
I studied civil engineering, and the reason I did that, perhaps fortunately I did have engineers in my family, so I was maybe opened and exposed to engineering at an earlier age than Olivia. But I always enjoyed sort of making things work and maths and physics at school. So I started looking at engineering, and actually my passion was always in roller coasters and going to theme parks, and it's what I loved since a young age. So I studied civil engineering because I wanted to do that with my career, and it was a route into that. But also, engineering as a whole is such a broad spectrum. Even if you focus whether it's civil engineering or chemical engineering, there are so many different routes and so many different career options. So for me, for example, it meant initially studying civil engineering, completing design calculations whilst working for a big engineering consultancy before I moved into project management. And that's when I started working in the theme park area, and I worked for a large company called Merlin Entertainments before I then started my own business with one of my co-workers, and since then we're working on our own, so it's very exciting.
Okay, so you know that obviously it's unusual that we don't have enough girls and women, so I just welcome Ala to the call. I think she's just connecting. So what was the response of your schools or whatever to the fact that you were wanting to go down that route, and was it unusual?
Shall I go first? I think from my school there wasn't masses of female engineers. I think chemical engineering, at least at Edinburgh where I studied, was a relatively even split. Even, I say 70-30, that's about as good as it gets. But the thing with, I remember being asked, I never really thought of it, and I think I'm lucky in that way because my parents are very much just like, she's going to do whatever she wants to do, and I had supportive that way. But then I remember very quickly being asked, oh, well, as a woman, why did you decide to do that? And it kind of had never really occurred to me until I started being asked quite a lot in first and second year, like, you know, why did you make this different choice? And it hadn't really occurred to me that it was a different choice until then. But then I think the big thing was when I did an integrated master's, so I did 5 years straight away, but a disproportionate amount of the female students graduated with just a bachelor's in comparison. So we dropped down massively in that last year from being relatively good at 70-30 to, I would say, closer to 90-10, maybe even worse than that. So I think that was the big thing that really stuck out, that they obviously hadn't managed to keep women interested in it in the same way that they had the male student population.
Just before you answer that, Michelle, welcome Ala.
Sorry, I was struggling to get on the call.
That's okay. We were just talking about, you know, whether, you know, their experiences of being a woman in the career, and basically, you know, sort of what, if there are any barriers, etc. So I'll just come to Michelle, and then you can sort of prepare what your experience and just say a little bit about what stage you're at as well at the same time to catch you up.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
So I think for me, if I look back, actually, the drop in the number of women studying the subjects I was doing actually started before engineering. So sort of studying physics at A level, there was actually a much larger proportion of male students. I don't think it ever occurred to me that it was an issue. To me, it was always a little bit, as Olivia said, well, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I want to do, and that there's no reason I can't do it, which I think that's very much the attitude that we should be taking moving forwards. But I understand that's not the same everywhere, and it can be more challenging. So I think it's just raising that awareness that engineering really is, it doesn't matter what gender you are, and we actually need people of different skill sets in the industry. So calls like this are great to encourage more people from different backgrounds, not just genders, but all kind of backgrounds that we need within the industry, because they bring together different skill sets that all together bring the best solutions. And that's what we do as engineers. We problem solve, and we find solutions to the world's problems.
Great. And what about you, Ala?
So I started off mainly because my grandfather was a carpenter, and my dad has an engineering background as well. So I was kind of always exposed to it. And when I was younger, I have 2 younger brothers, and so there's a lot of like Lego and things like that around in the house. So I was always kind of exposed to that, and mathematics as well. So growing up, it was kind of like a no-brainer that I was going to do something related to maths, especially. And so when there was a variety of things to choose from, engineering was kind of like a no-brainer for me. Although in saying that, when I went to my career counsellor in school, when I was still in primary school, because I grew up in Ireland and I studied in Ireland, when I said the things that I was interested in, she actually told me that I would probably be better off doing home economics, so more like cooking and things like that. Even though like none of the subjects that I studied, or none of the subjects that I really was fond of, like biology and chemistry and maths, were anything related to that. And so at that point, I could have actually just taken her advice and went down that route. But because I'd kind of been exposed to that environment at home, I wasn't afraid to just go for it anyway. So I suppose that was like, could have been a bit of a blocking factor for me, but it wasn't. And then going forward, then I ended up doing structural engineering in Ireland, and I moved over to London, and I did a master's here as well. In terms of barriers, if that's the question, like in terms of barriers in terms of engineering at the moment.
Yeah, you just identified one, which was the careers advice of saying do home economics.
Yeah, and something else then was like when I did my undergraduate, when I did my structural engineering degree, I was the only female in the class. And I actually, in our first year, we did common engineering. So we were mixed in with other engineering, so biomedical engineering, mechanical, chemical. And out of all of the engineering types that were available, and we shared the same classes, I was the only female in any of the like in structural. But then there was a lot in chemical, there was a lot in biomed. And at that point, actually, I could have switched the next year to a different discipline, but I stuck to the one that I did. So again, that could have been another point where I would have been like, look, I'm actually the only girl here. All my friends are from other disciplines. I might be better off switching to a different discipline. So there's small little things like that along the way that I suppose maybe it do contribute. Well, it's not maybe, but they do contribute in terms of the numbers that we have in engineering at the moment, in, I suppose, civil as well. Areas where you might not feel very comfortable, that you don't exactly fit in, that you might not be able to speak up and things like that, and they do end up being barriers. And that's all before I've even stepped into my first job role. So it kind of makes you think, like, you know, it's not necessarily just in the workplace, but it's also like leading up to that. And so it's quite important to like engage with like schools, do a lot of like STEM sessions with younger children as well, not just people that are about to do their A-levels, but like, you know, right from the get-go. So yeah.
And what's your job now, Alla?
I'm a construction engineer. So my main area is tunnel engineering, and I work on a project in London at the moment called Tideway. So we're building the new super sewer system for London.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. No, that's great. Did you have any role models? I know some of you have talked about your family, but did you have any other female role models as you were going through engineering?
Not for me. Like in fact, I've been working for 6 years now, and I've worked on various projects like Crossrail, various station upgrades on the London Underground, HS2, and Tideway is the first project I've worked on where I've worked with fellow female colleagues, like fellow female engineers. Like, so in my 6 years of working in London and working on a variety of projects, I've never actually worked with another female engineer up until about 1.5 years ago. So that's something as well to kind of think about as well.
Are there support networks out there as well? Like, do women in engineering provide you with sort of networks to connect you and share experiences and support one another?
I'll answer again for this one, just for myself. There are support networks, but it's difficult to have support networks if you don't actually work with some of the people immediately. So if you don't have immediate managers or you don't have immediate people within your workplace, it's quite difficult, because you can go to these support networks, you can vent to other people, you can talk to other people about what there should be in the workplace. But if you don't see it in your immediate environment, it's quite difficult to action a lot of things, even if you have a very supportive network, even if we're trying to strive for various numbers. It can only help so much, but that's my opinion. Maybe the girls have different opinions on it.
What about the other two?
In my experience, I found some of the sort of strongest support doesn't necessarily have to be female. So if you're working in an office that is mainly male, then I think the industry as a whole, once you're within it, is actually very welcoming. So I've never had any issues. Even as a civil engineer working on construction sites quite a lot, and in my role I quite often have to physically go onto site to check what's being built matches sort of what we sold into the client and what they're expecting to see. And I think as long as you're sort of there and you show that you understand, you're confident in your abilities, and you know what you're doing, then there is that respect across the industry, and it's not something I've ever had an issue with. And I think the more we can get that across, the more we'll sort of break down these barriers. And going back to your previous question, I don't see there being, I didn't certainly see any female role models when I was sort of getting into the industry. That said, I think, you know, we rhymed, there wasn't as much being done to promote females in engineering. I think there is more now, and I think there's a lot more sort of visible role models for young people to look up to.
Good. And what about you, Olivia?
Yeah, so I think I've been lucky because I started doing this as engineering very quickly after graduating. So I immediately started finding these women in engineering and BAME in engineering networks. So I've had it from the get-go coming out of graduating. Having said that, I didn't really know anything about it going through university, and I think it's valuable to have something like that, you know, before you start working necessarily. And also, had I not got onto this track of kind of the outreach side of things, I don't think I would have found them very easily. And especially as I've kind of got into a non-traditional engineering route, as Alla was saying, that because I wouldn't necessarily have found, I think there was only 4 other engineers within my team at Lush, all of which were male, and I wouldn't have necessarily found that network had I not done the kind of extracurricular stuff outside of my job. And then to quickly loop back to role models, yeah, I definitely didn't have any female engineering role models growing up. I think I've been asked that question since, and I've kind of back researched and I've now got my answer, but that's only because of having done the work later on. So it's not the same.
I mean, of course, you are now role models and you're doing this outreach. So thank you so much for doing that. But what are you envisaging your own future as a role model in the industry, what do you think that we need to do to promote? You say there's more going on, but as you are now role models, what do you think you could develop through being a role model in engineering?
I think the key is just showing that breadth of engineering, and we've got some brilliant examples of this call on people doing such different things. And I think there is still quite this misconception that engineering is fixing cars or it's being on a dirty construction site, and it's not what it is at all. So I think it is getting a really varied group of people together and actually showing it, whether it's designing products for Lush or it's building roller coasters or spaceships into Mars or super sewers. There's so much going on, and I think that's what's really going to grab the attention of young people, and that's what we need to shout about.
Right. And have you, Ala, engaged with careers advice at all after your home economics moment?
Yeah, I actually did end up going back to the school later on after I'd graduated from my degree, and kind of spoken up about that, and they identified that it was an issue, and why did that person actually come to that conclusion. And it's more of like a systemic thing, if that makes sense. So trying to understand the root of the problem as well. Yeah. Another point that one of the girls was mentioning there was about mentioning about the breadth of engineering available, and what kind of issues we do encounter, and also the people that are around you as well. For me, I have being able to openly speak about things as well. So, it's really, really good that we're able to have this very varied call and talk various issues, although it's a short amount of time. But being able to speak out if you encounter issues, I think is a really, really important thing. For me, I have encountered numerous harassment and different things like that on different jobs. And when I was a lot younger and 6 years ago on my first job, I would have been afraid to speak out on something. And after a while, it took me a time before I would speak out to my managers and be like, look, this has happened to me. Is this right or is this wrong? Is this just banter? Is it okay to be talked to like this or touched like this? And they're very uncomfortable conversations to have, but it's really, really important that we use our platforms as role models to be able to say, look, these things may not have happened to me personally, but for me, it has happened to me personally. But to be able to look and say that they do and recognize that they do happen, and be able to say, look, this is wrong and it shouldn't happen. It may not necessarily have happened to me in construction, but because there's a lot of younger girls now that are in construction, and when you're in there on your own on a site with 50 men, and for example, there's only one toilet. For me, when I first went to one of my sites, I was the only engineer. I was a setting out engineer on site. I was only female, and there's only one male toilet. And for me, I'd spoken to someone before on a different job, and they told me, look, actually it's a legal requirement that they have to have a female and a male. But for me, I didn't know that before. So if I hadn't been able to speak to someone, I wouldn't have known that. So I suppose just making sure that people are aware of some of the issues that do happen in the industry, and the routes that you should go about engaging them and encountering them and tackling the main issues. I think that's literally one of the most important things that we can do as role models, because we can keep talking about, increasing the numbers, increasing the figures, but we need to really, really hone in and focus on retaining the numbers that we have, because there's a reason why women in construction only last about an average of 5 years. There's a reason for that, and it's because there's a lot of issues that we encounter that we kind of say that don't happen, or we don't know what to do about them, because there's no visible solutions to them. But the more we talk about issues, and the more we recognize that there are things that we can do, the longer women will last in construction, and then the numbers will actually increase. It's not about just getting a figure, if that makes sense. It's about retaining the staff that we have. Otherwise, I'd have actually a lot more female role models. At the moment, I still don't. You know what I mean? So I think for me anyway, personally, that's the most important thing to do as a role model for me anyway, personally.
Great. And what about you, Olivia, just finally?
Yeah, I think I would agree with what's been said before. It's a balance between changing minds of the incoming students or kids who are getting interested, people above me. I've still got to work my way through a career, and if there's people who are in charge, for want of a better word, who are not going to be as enlightened as people I work with in my immediate circle. And so on. So it's changing minds below and above, and exactly as Anna was saying, it's that retention span. I know chemical engineering, as I said, is much more of an even split, but quite a lot of my friends who've gone to more kind of hardcore, as I like to call it, chemical engineering, out on an oil and gas rig, their life is a lot more difficult than mine, and keeping that sense of interest for women, and just making it there's not quite so many barriers, and every day isn't quite so much of a struggle to get through. Really important in those kind of, you know, those I'm lucky I'm not in a traditional engineering world, so I think that makes my life a little bit more easier. But in those very, very traditional engineering worlds, I think there's still much more of the gender stereotypes that it's harder to overcome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. It's been really good to chat to you, and thank you for all you're doing.